What's going on, guys? Thank you for tuning in for another episode of JB Trickle RC. This particular video, we're continuing the basic setup and tuning guide series. The previous episode, I covered the 1/10 scale pan car, paved oval cars, carpet cars, pan cars. But we covered that in the last episode and going to be moving forward with that on the information for these purpose-built dirt oval cars. I say purpose-built because that's the particular chassis that I use in the video to go over some of the basic tuning techniques with you. But most of the information in here will also translate across the board for you. It will cover some of your Traxxas street stock stuff, various other dirt oval chassis that you generally are racing. A lot, or I even should say most of this information will translate across that board. But also just want to let you know too, there's a couple diagrams I use in the video. One of those, I use the same diagram from the pan car video. So the chassis is going to look a little different, but the entire idea remains the same. So I just wanted to give that little bit of information up front. But guys, I hope you enjoy the video. Hope I can help some of you out. So most of you are already going to know this, but for those of you that don't, that may be new to this, I'm going to give you an explanation of the call outs for like the left front, left rear, right rear. You're going to hear a lot in this video. So to kind of explain that, imagine that there's an actual driver in this car like you see here. So with that, you're going to treat this just like it's a real vehicle. So you're going to have your left front, left rear, right front, right rear, all from the perspective of the actual driver as if you were sitting in the car yourself. That's how we're going to call this out. That's how it's referenced, as if you were sitting in the car. So whenever you say left front, it's like you're in the car itself. That's how we refer to it, and I just wanted to call that out now to help save any possible confusion for anybody that was not aware of that. All right, so just want to let you guys know, even though that this diagram is of a pan car, the camber information is still going to translate to our dirt oval cars as well. So just want to let you know that ahead of time, and also the camber information I'm about to go over affects the front and the rear of these dirt oval cars. Now, if you take a look at this diagram, you're going to notice that on the left front of the car, you're going to be running positive camber. What those blue line represents is zero camber and a perfectly straight vertical line, and the red line is actually representing the camber, the angle of your tire. So on your left front, you're going to be running positive camber where the top of the tire will be leaning towards the left. On the right side, you're going to be running negative camber. And again, if you look at the blue vertical line, which represents zero camber, you're going to notice that the red line that is representing your negative camber, it would mean that the top of the tire is going to be leaning towards the center of the car, the inside of the car. The biggest thing to take away from this to notice is that your camber is both going to be pointing in the left direction. Okay, everyone, let's get right to it. And just so you know, the particular car that's being used in this video, this is a GFRP 3.2 Havoc. All the information you're going to get in this video does translate to nearly all dirt oval cars. This one is set up for late model. This is also going to be based on where I race, which is going to be a hard packed clay tracks. All my local tracks are run pretty much the same way as far as that goes. But the information I'm going to give you today will translate to custom work cars, other manufacturer purpose-built cars, as well as like some of your Traxxas street stocks and things of that nature as well. Some areas will be more specific to these purpose-built cars. Some of the areas that will benefit like the Traxxas street stock, I will try to mention that in the video as well. So with that said, what I'd like to say first and let everybody know is I'm not actually going to throw out a general overall setup. And there's a reason for that. And one of the biggest reasons is due to the various people in different locations that may be watching this video, the particular setup that I myself run and some other friends run may not work for you. Loose dirt and tight packed clay, there's various other things to take in consideration for such. So with that said, I highly recommend, if you're running a GFRP car or a Custom Works car or any of the other manufacturer purpose-built dirt oval cars, if you're not running a purpose-built car and you're running like a Traxxas street stock or something like that, I suggest you talk to some of your local guys to help you get a baseline setup. But if you are running a purpose-built car, again, a GFRP or a Custom Works or another similar built car, you will likely be able to find a team driver baseline setup on the website. I know you can find a team driver baseline setup for GFRP. I know you can find several team driver baseline setups for Custom Works on their websites. And I say that because I ran a Custom Works Intimidator G6, then later an Intimidator G7, and now I'm on the GFRP Havoc platform. So I know that you can get those team driver baseline setups on those websites. So if you are just starting or you're new to this and you have one of these, I highly recommend that you do that, and that will get you at least rolling, get you on the track with something that's manageable and drivable. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is on this particular car and all the purpose-built classes that run local to me, this is for my 21.5 class. This is somewhat I don't really want to call it the sportsman class, but it is the class before you would go into like the 17.5 Pro class. I guess you could call it a sportsman, but it is highly, highly competitive. But we are running foam tires. And we may run rubber occasionally, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. But we are running foam tires. And a lot of people that are getting started in this don't really know where to start out with the tires. And if that's the case, I recommend you look up Chris at Blue Groove. He has a Facebook page. He cuts tires. You can order, tell him what diameter, how many grooves, and how many cross cuts and things of that nature that you want. But if you are preparing to cut the tires yourself, there's a couple things that I just want to throw out there, and I'm going to go over this more in depth in an actual tire cutting video coming at a later date. But I've had several people ask, what is a good starter diameter to start with these tires? The tires, from what I've seen, have come in at about 2.73 to 2.75 in diameter, somewhere in that area. And a lot of people will tell you, and a book I'm going to reference to you later will tell you 2.65 is a good starting point. And there's nothing wrong with that. That might be a very good starting point. I myself and several others that I race with, we generally cut at 2.70 for starting point diameter on the tire. And then relatively with these particular cars here, a lot of times we'll cut the six grooves, front and rear, and the cross cuts depend on track and personal feel and things of that nature. But again, we will cover that more in depth in an upcoming actual tire cutting video. I'll go over some of that a little bit more. But for the sake of, since this is a kind of a base setup, base tuning guide for this kind of car, I did want to go ahead and cover that topic slightly. Now, onto the rubber tires. Certain tracks and certain times of the years, you can run these purpose-built cars with rubber tires. We've done that locally a couple times. We've had a rubber tire-only race on a loose dirt track race type scenario. And really, with the rubber tires, I just want to specify that you can generally order those pre-mounted on the wheels, or you can order the tire, put your own, foam and glue them to your new wheels and all that stuff yourself. But one reason why I wanted to bring up the rubber tire, and this is actually for the Traxxas street stock and Traxxas space guys as well, if you're running rubber tires, don't limit yourself to just one set at one compound. I do want to elaborate that if they allow it, the rules allow it, go ahead and get you a couple compounds. If there's a soft or a high bite or a standard or super soft, I personally like to have at least one set of every compound in the allowed tire. Now, speaking back on the foam tire stuff again, in this particular class in our area, we're only allowed two compounds, and that is the BSR greens or the BSR blues. The blue's a little bit harder tire than the green, so we can swap those around sometimes, go to all four, run harder on the outside, whatever we need to do. But I did want to touch base on that information for you on the tires, both foam tire related and rubber tire related. And again, the rubber tire information goes over to you Traxxas street stock racers as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the importance of a good quality spring kit. So the spring kit on these particular purpose-built dirt oval cars and your Traxxas street stocks and dirt oval cars that are on another platform, they're going to have shocks and springs in all four corners. Okay, so you're going to want a proper spring kit, and it may take a couple. And an example of that is on this GFRP car, the rear springs are actually longer or taller than the front springs. So I've got two spring kits. Both of mine are, I can't remember if my spring kits were GFRP or Mudslide, but they're both reputable spring kits. They come with a chart. They tell you the color combination and what each color translates to in weight. Again, you're going to notice right now that I've got black springs all the way around. That is not my normal setup, but I put that in the sake of the video, like I did in my intro, letting you guys know if you're just starting out and you don't really know where to go yet, get it online and get one of those team driver setups, or talk to some of your local guys to help you get on a starting setup for your local surface, racing surface. All right, so now let's talk about those springs a little bit more and incorporate and explain why those mean so much to these particular cars and dirt oval in general. So first thing I want to talk about is your ride height. So your ride height is going to translate from whenever you have a battery in the car. I don't have one in here, but let me say that again. When the battery's in the car, your tires are on the car all the way around, and your car is sitting on a flat surface. Your ride height on a purpose-built dirt oval car is going to be measured in the back area of the chassis around this area, and on the front side of the chassis somewhere in this area. Okay, so again, in the front area somewhere in here. You can't go much further up beyond that because this actually has a full kick-up plate, and as far back as you can get on the chassis plate itself in the rear. This is a ride height gauge. This is an important tool that you're going to want to have if you're running one of these purpose-built race cars. Okay, they make several different kinds. This one's just an aluminum block that's marked out. There's some people that have a one made by RPM that slides up and down. That is up to you, but this is the particular one I like to use. So again, if you're going to measure your ride height, you need to have the battery in the car. You need to have the car sitting on a flat surface. And at that point, you would measure all four corners here, 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 and somewhere in this area here. Ride height is going to translate to a lot of other things in the car. Now, you may ask yourself, what ride height do I want? That's a good question. Okay, one of the books, again, I'm going to reference to you at the end of the video, says generally a 12 millimeter all-around ride height is a good starting point for these purpose-built cars. And that is very good information. And I agree to that. A 12 millimeter baseline all the way around is a good starting point and a general starting point. A lot of people use that. However, with that said, I myself sometimes will run a ride height that is even all the way around, but more times than not, my front is going to be lower than my rear. Okay. I'll say that again. Most times whenever I'm running this, my front ride height is going to be lower than the rear. And recommended for a general all-purpose starting ride height all the way around is 12 millimeters. So, you can say 12 in the back, 12 up front, 12 in the back, 11 up front, whatever. Like I said, again, I personally like to run the front end a little bit lower. I did that on my Custom Works car as well. I'm doing it on my GFRP car now. So that's a little bit of ride height information for you. Now, one reason why I said that you want to have the battery in here and your springs come into play here is as you're adjusting your corners and your ride height plays a very important role in all of this. So that's the reason you want to have the battery in and basically the car race ready on a flat surface, because you may have to tweak on this side, tweak on this side, tweak on this side to get the ride heights right, especially with the weight of the battery being on the chassis as well. Generally, your front, you want to be close to equal if you're wanting to start from zero, as far as like your collar spacing on either side. Your rears could be off a little bit. And I'm not going to go into that too much more detail other than what I just did on that area, because we're not talking cross weight in this video. We're not talking scales. We're talking basic setup changes and techniques. I'm just throwing a little bit of additional information out there to help you get rolling, again, if you're new or looking to get into this. So we talked about the ride heights, and let me express one more time, ride heights are a very important key factor with these cars. Okay, with these purpose-built cars. With your Traxxas slash-built stuff, if you're not allowed to run a low center gravity chassis, the ride height may not actually mean quite as much. But we'll touch on that later as well. So, and I say that because if you need to adjust on your collars, if you go out on the track and your car's loose, you go on the track and your car's tight, you have to adjust on these collars, okay? You're going to also be throwing off your ride height. Now, if you're making a minor adjustment here and there or over here, it's not a big deal. But if you make a lot of adjustments on there, you're throwing your ride heights off. So get in the practice of keeping a check on your ride heights. So if you go in the corner and the car is loose in, okay, if you're going into the corner and the car is loose in, the car's wanting to spin out entering, there's a couple different things you can do. And we'll cover all of these. But the first thing you may want to do is go to a stiffer right front spring. Yes, you can run the collar down a little bit and try to see if that'll give you a little bit more positive reading on that. But again, like we talked about ride heights, you don't want to rely on just adjusting collars all the time. If you adjust the collar, you like the change, move the collar back to your original ride height and replace that spring with the new spring. But again, if you're loose in, spinning out, going into the corner, you can go to a stiffer right front spring. Now, what do you do if you're tight in? If you're pushing into the corner, the car does not want to turn in, what can you do? Okay, well, at that point, you can go to a softer right front spring. Generally, a softer right front spring will help the car turn in better. Okay, so again, if you're pushing or tight into the corner, consider trying a softer right front spring. Okay, so now, what do we do if we are loose on exit of the corner? What do you do if you're loose coming out of the corner? If your car's wanting to spin out coming out? There's a few things you can do there too, but first let's talk about the springs and shocks again. What you could do is you could go to a stiffer left rear spring, which is this side, and a softer right rear spring. Those changes will help tighten up the car a little bit so it's not as free and as loose coming off. And again, like I said earlier, yes, you can make that adjustment in practice by adjusting on your collars, because that's going to mimic that slightly. If you like what the car did, you need to move your ride heights back, move your collars back to the ride height, and go ahead and make the spring change. Now, what do you do if you're tight coming out? If you're coming out of the corner and the car's got a bad push, you're going up towards the wall, you're having to come off the throttle because you're pushing like a dump truck, right? What do you do then? Well, actually, it's pretty much quite the opposite of what we just did to tighten it up. If you're tight off and you need to loosen the car on exit, you would go to a softer left rear spring, which is here, and a stiffer right rear spring, which is right here. And again, you don't want to just rely on the collar adjustments. You want to make these changes based off the springs, changing out the springs, and using that information that I just told you about. That'll be very helpful, and make sure that you get the right spring combo and get the car reacting how you want the car to react going in and on exit of the corner. Okay, so now let's talk about wheel spacing, front spacing and rear spacing. The front rear spacing can also help tighten or free up the car, and can be used as a very minor adjustment or drastic, depends on how far you want to go with it. But generally, if you space your front tires to the right, you're going to tighten up corner entry. If you space your front tires to the left, you're going to free up corner entry. And I will give you this bit of information up front, but just because this is based off of my experience, some people may tell you otherwise, but I will tell you this. On a GFRP car, I'm generally going to be sprung higher on the front than the rear. These cars, that's just the way they like to run. These cars are a little more free, I guess you would say, if I was to compare the two. On a Custom Works car, I was generally softer up front than I was in the rear. And we're just talking about the tire spacing right now. Also on the Custom Works car, I generally ran my left front spaced out to the left and my right front spaced all the way in towards the center of the car. And again, by spacing your tires to the left, it will help free up the car in corner entry. Now, right now on my GFRP setup, I will generally run a neutral area. And whether that's in or out, that can vary. And I'm going to go over that portion here in just a moment for you as well. All right, so let's talk about rear spacing now. So rear spacing, as you space your rear tires to the right, you're going to free up corner entry. But if you were to space your rear tires to the left, you're going to tighten up your corner entry. So in this particular car, on my GFRP car, I'm generally running, once again, pretty much a centered spacing on the rear as well. And I'll show you what I mean by that here shortly. But again, like I just told you again earlier, from my personal experience on my Custom Works car, I generally ran my front space to the left, and I ran my rear space to the right. And that was all an effort to get that car freed up better for entry. But again, this particular car here, I can run these in neutral locations and the car still enter without issue. So that's just a little difference that I've noticed between the two cars. There may be people out there that is going to say, no, JB, that's not right. That's not my experience. That's fine. That's the experience that I had compared between the two. And I'm just sharing that information out there in case that may be able to help somebody that may be fighting a tight or a loose car. But again, you can use the front and rear spacing as well as your spring changes that we talked about earlier, one at a time or in combination to help get your car to be freed up or tightened up. And that's in entry or exit. So those are the general basic tuning tips I got for you as far as freeing up and tightening up one of these purpose-built cars. Now, on your Traxxas street stock based stuff, the spring information I gave you will relatively still translate and translate well. Now, your spacing on many of those cars, if they allow you to run those kind of spacers, or if you can find spacers for it, that could still translate and help you as well. But I know some of those classes are locked, so the spacing portion of that may not help so much. But now that I explained the spacing process to you and the spring process to you, let me show you what I mean by spacing it left or right. So we're going to do that first. I'm going to take my little stand out from behind the car. And we're going to take this front wheel off. Okay. So as I slid that front wheel off, I want you to take notice of something. There's this little shim here, this little spacer. Okay. And what that spacer does is this allows me to move my tire to the inside or outside. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I were to put this tire back on the axle now, and then put this on the outside and then run my axle nut down, at that point, that moved my tire in towards the center of the car. But if I put this little spacer and shim on the axle first, and then my tire and then my nut, that actually ran the left tire out towards the outside of the car. So that is how you're going to shim this, your front. You can shim it in or out, or should I say left or right. You can do that to both sides on the front. But again, to free up the car on entry, you're going to want to space the tires, the front tires, to the left. Okay. So there's the spacing portion for the front I wanted to go over. And then I'm going to show you some of the spacers on the rear of the car as well. Let's take the wheel nut off the rear. And then we're going to show you the spacer on the rear. Now, you'll notice there's actually an aluminum spacer on this left rear that, if you can see here, there's a drive pin already located there. So I can put the wheel on just like that. Okay. I can slide the wheel on, it'll ride just like that. But what that did compared to where I was running it, because I had this spacer on the left rear that would move my left rear tire in. So again, I'm running a neutral spacing setup on the rear. Both of my rear tires are currently spaced the same way, but I can make a spacing adjustment to the left or right based on using this shim, not using the shim, or even going to a bigger spacer shim. Well, spacer, not shim. And again, for the rear, okay, if you space your wheels to the right this way, you're going to free up the car. If you space them to the left, you're going to tighten up the car. Okay. But again, that can be done with these spacers here. And again, I have them on both sides, but I just wanted to show that to you so you could see what I was talking about. This back on. Okay. So now with that said, we've talked about the springs. We've talked about the front and rear spacing. So now we're going to talk about a couple other things. The other thing that I want to talk about is your front toe. We talked about this in my pan car video as well, another important piece of information. Generally, you're going to run with a little bit of toe out, okay? What toe out means is your front of the tires are going to be further apart than the rear side of your front tires, which would be closer apart. It don't take a lot of toe, but generally, you're going to run just a little bit of toe out. So if you're parallel like this, a little bit of toe out are going to look like this. You don't want toe in, at least not from my experience. But again, I'm telling you the basics and, you know, information based on my experience and, you know, things that have been taught to me in the past, as well as, you know, a book I'm going to reference again here shortly. So anyway, if you toe in would generally give you less turn-in steering, okay? So a lot of times we're looking for better steering in, because if you can get into the corner, you can set yourself up to get off the corner if your setup's proper. Front toe out, you will actually have more turn-in steering. So you can tame the steering of the car by adjusting the toe, but again, in general, I'm going to run some slight toe out on the front end. Now let's talk about rear toe. Now, this particular car here, whether it's Custom Works, GFRP, or whatever, it has, see if I can get it in the shot, adjustable rear toe arms. And that will allow you to adjust the angle of your toe on the fly. But I want to show you that and explain to you that these were adjustable toe arms, because on some cars that, yes, you can adjust the toe, they're not, you actually have to remove parts to do it, but these will allow you to do it on the fly if you've got like a wrench in your pocket. So real convenient to have. But let's talk about the general idea of the toe and how it works on these purpose-built cars and any dirt oval cars that you may be racing, that they allow you to run these. Some classes they allow them, some classes they do not. So with that said, generally I like to run my left rear toed in a good bit. It's not unheard of for people to be running, you know, 5 degrees at the left, in the left rear at all times. At least around here, that's not unheard of. The right, and I generally run a lot of toe in on my left rear, and I generally leave it alone. What I do use for tuning is I generally use my right rear. I will tune and adjust that toe way more often than I do on my left rear. So let's talk about a couple areas where that rear toe adjustment can help. So one of those is if you're tight on entry, you can increase the left rear toe. Okay. So that's one reason why a lot of people will go ahead and run a lot of toe on that left rear. And like I said, we'll leave it at, you know, a substantial amount. There's people I know that run it from 3.5, and there's people that max out all the way to the 6 degrees. So, or more. I'm sure they can get more out of it somehow. But generally, I'm going to be around 5 here. That's my preference. That's what I like. But I will generally leave the left rear alone and tune with the right rear. So again, if you're tight on entry, you can increase the left rear toe. And by increasing left rear toe, that means at this point here, you would actually be turning the tire this way. You're going to be turning it in. think of it as rear steer. Okay. Now, if you're loose on entry, you can actually decrease that left rear toe. And that means if you're pointing inward like this, you can decrease that toe by pulling it out back to straight if you needed to. Again, I typically don't. I try to leave this tire alone, but yes, there have been times that I've actually pulled some toe out of the left rear as well. So let's talk about the right rear now. So with the right rear, if you're tight on exit, at that point, you can decrease the right rear toe in. And what that means is generally think of the right rear as like if you're running 0. So if you're tight on exit, it's telling you to decrease the right rear toe in. So what does that tell you? Some cars, a lot of your fixed toe cars generally run toe in on both sides. So that would look like this. This one's towed in that way. This one's towed in that way. So if you want to decrease toe in, you need to pull the toe of this tire out like such. So if you're tight on exit, decrease rear toe in. So at that point, again, that means decrease toe in. So that means you need to bring that right rear tire out. So if you're towed in, try to go to 0. If you're at 0, you need to start adding some toe out. Again, think of adding rear steer to the car. If you're loose on exit, you can increase your right rear toe in. Okay. So at that point, if you're running the toe out and you're loose on exit, you can actually bring that in a little bit to fine tune that. But I will tell you again, much like I said on my left rear, I do typically run a good bit of toe out on my right rear as well. So both of my tires are pointing like, if this were to represent your two tires straight, if you're looking at the car from an aerial view, both of my tires are running like that. Okay. Now that's a drastic representation, but I wanted that to be sure. Generally, if you get a car that has fixed rear toe, you hardly ever see any that are perfectly straight parallel to one another. They're generally both going to be towed in the rear like this. Okay, so let's talk camber. Now, I'd covered this pretty drastically in my paved oval video, but we're going to go over it again in dirt oval because it's just important here as it is there, and even more so because you can actually run camber on all 4 corners of this car, where with a pan car, it's fixed on the rear. You're only changing the camber up front. So, generally, on the left side of the car, that is the front and the rear of the left side, you're going to be running positive camber. And what that means is the top of these 2 tires are going to be leaning away from the center of the car. They're going to be leaning outwards. Then on the right side of the car, front and rear, you're going to be running negative camber. And what that means is the top of the tires are going to be leaning inward towards the center of the car. And I'm going to throw up a little diagram here again and just kind of give you a quick breakdown of that once again. So how much camber should I be running? So we already know that we're going to be running positive camber on the left side of the car. I'm going to be running negative camber on the right side of the car. So how much? Typically on the front, I have talked to several different people. I know in some instances, some people may be running 0 camber on one particular side. But I haven't heard of anybody getting too crazy on the camber. And again, this can vary depending on where you race, the track, type of track conditions, and all that. But generally, I know some people have ran 0 camber. I personally will generally run between 1 to 2.5 degrees of camber. Okay, so that's a much smaller window than what I generally tune and adjust with on paved oval. But on dirt oval, me personally, on my front end, I generally run between 1 to 2.5 degrees of camber. On the rear, again, I will generally run 1 to 2.5 degrees of camber, depending on the situation. And I believe currently right now, the way the car was sitting, I'm wanting to say I'm at 1.5 up front and 1.5 in the rear as we sit. It may be 2 up front and 1.5 in the rear. But I just want to give you, if you're new, just starting out or thinking about getting into this, just want to give you some of that information to help you get, the car squared up where you want it. All right, so now we got the car on a flat surface. We got a battery in the car. Okay, this is not my normal race battery, but this is just one I had sitting close by that is the proper size. Could be, it's the right spec and everything. But, so now that you got the battery in the car, it's pretty much ready like if you're going to race, okay? This is the point where you want to adjust your camber. You want to adjust your camber with battery in the car, just like you were going to adjust your ride height with the battery in the car. You want to adjust the toe of your car with the battery in the car, just like if you're going to adjust the ride height of your car. The reason is that battery adds weight to the chassis. It makes the car overall squat more. You can see that suspension travel. Okay, watch this whenever I pick it up. Set down, pick it up, set up. You can see that suspension travel. So you want to set all of your toe and your camber and your ride heights with the car loaded as if it's going to be going on the racetrack. At this point is where you'd want to adjust, make sure your toe's where you want it. This is going to be where you're going to want to make sure and double check your camber. You can do that with your camber gauge. This is one by RPM. They've got several different ones. They got some nice fancy aluminum ones. They got some that, like a clear translucent plastic with numbers on it. There's several different ones you can get, but this is RPM camber gauge. But at this point, this is where you would use your gauge and you would set your camber on all four corners. You would set your toe on all four corners, and then you're going to adjust on your collars to set your ride height. And again, your overall ride height, you're going to be looking at a good starting point at 12 millimeter or with the front slightly lower than the rear. Okay. The reason I'm telling you this now, and it's best to do this together with the battery in the car, is I showed you the suspension loaded and everything, right? Okay. Whenever you adjust your ride height, if you've already got camber in the car and you adjust your ride height, or you've already got toe in your car and you adjust your ride height, depending on how many rounds you put on those collars, it can change the camber or toe in the car slightly as well. So you want to work on this kind of together. That's what, and whenever I adjust, anytime I make a collar adjustment, I will go back to my pit area, I will measure my ride heights, and I will double check my camber. That's something you need to get in the habit of, because you can easily get the car out of whack and not even realize you did it. So always, get that, make that part of your normal process after every run, after every practice, after every heat. Double check your ride heights, double check your camber, make sure nothing's changed, especially if you were adjusting on the collars, trying to free up or tighten up the car a little bit for whatever reason. So, as you can see, page is torn a little bit. I've had this in here for a long time. This is Matt Murphy's Dirt Oval Chassis Tuning Guide. And guys, this is out there on the internet in PDF format. Anybody can print this off. Anybody can have this put in their note, anybody can put this in their notebook and have this information. The information that I went over in this video would probably be equivalent to 1 page worth. Everything I used today was the basic tuning guide. This is the basic information that you need to know what to do, how to do, why to do, when to do, okay? That's the information you need for basic tuning. This guide here, I forgot how many, okay, there's 21 pages. Everything that I went over is in this book, spread out. You can see here on the index, it goes over several different things. There's a lot more information in this book. And I highly recommend, if you're a new racer, if you're just getting into this or considering getting into this, I highly recommend you get this guide. And guys, I don't care if you're racing a purpose-built car like this, or if you're racing a Traxxas street stock. Most of the information in here, as far as your tuning and things of that nature, will translate. This car does focus a lot more on the purpose-built cars, but just like in this video, a lot of the information will translate. But again, I just wanted to share that with you guys because this is a fantastic reference book that you can keep in your toolbox, in your notebook at all times. I've been RC racing off and on for many years now, And I can't tell you how many times I'll sit there. I know what to do. I know which collar to adjust on. I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. I've done it thousands of times. But I can't tell you, sometimes you just have that little moment. Brain don't want to register. And it's nice to have that that setup book nearby, that tuning guide book nearby. All right, guys. Well, that pretty much sums up the basic tuning video for the dirt oval cars. And again, I know this video did mainly focus on these purpose-built cars. But again, most of the information in this video will translate over many different dirt oval car platforms. Again, purpose-built was the focus of this one. But your Traxxas street stocks, your several other variations of dirt oval cars, a lot of this information will translate over to. Well, guys, that pretty much concludes the basic setup and tuning guide for the dirt oval cars. And again, I know for a lot of my current racing friends and various other racers that view my channel, I know this video may not have been helpful for you, but again, this is designated for those new people just getting into it. This is designated for the person that's thinking about getting into it. This information, this help's out there. You just got to look for it sometimes. So if my video explaining some of this can help just one person, that's a success in my opinion. So that's the goal of this, trying to help out those newer drivers, the newer people just getting into it, or the people that are thinking about getting into it, maybe researching, some information on this stuff. Also, guys, there's a little bit more information about these cars and some things you can do as far as like shocks, shock oils, shock building, diff building, things like that you need to know about these cars as well. I didn't cover that in this episode, and one reason is I've actually got a 3 or 4 part series where I actually rebuilt this car. I got this car used from a friend of mine. I went through it from the ground up. So I'm going to link that video series in the description for this video. And if you want some more information on, some diff, direct drive diff building, shock building, CVD rebuilding, things of that nature, you'll be able to find that in that other video series. So I will link that in the description of this video, just to help some of you new racers out too that are just getting into it, may need some help in that area as well. But guys, I hope that some of this information helps some of you new racers out and up and coming racers. I've got some more video series planned that are similar to this. I had a request also to actually cover my Traxxas street stock, so I'll be doing a video on that in the near future as well. Guys, I appreciate each and every one of you, and I'll catch you guys next time.